Hello. Good evening, everyone. My name is Emma Moore. I'm the curatorial assistant for the public programme here. I'd like to welcome you all to tonight's event. It's a very great pleasure to welcome Jan Verwoert, who will be speaking through masks in a sense this evening. Jan Verwoert is a critic and a writer on contemporary art and cultural theory and a contributing editor to Frieze magazine. He's a member of the advisory board of the Munich Kunstverein and has been guest professor of contemporary art and theory at the Academy of Umeå, Sweden, and the Royal College of Art in London. He is the author of Masks Jan Verwoert, In Search of the Miraculous, and the collection of essays, Tell Me What You Want, What You Really, Really Want, and together with Michael Stevenson, author of Animal Spirits Fables and the Parlance of Our Time. Jan has also written a few articles on the work of Geoffrey Farmer, so I feel like he has a very in-depth knowledge of this work, and it will be really interesting to see him peel back the layers and uncover all of the hidden aspects of Farmer's exhibition. So following Jan's presentation, we'll have a short Q&A, and then we'll open up to questions from the audience. We are recording the event and live streaming, so you can say hello to the online audience, and if you could just hang on for the microphones for your questions, that would be great. We do have 2 roving mics, and the gallery assistants will be able to get them to you. So I'll hand over to Jan, and thank you all very much for coming.
Hey, thank you, Emma. Thank you for the invitation, for the introduction, and thanks for coming tonight. I'm still haunted by a bio that is somewhere on the internet. I think that was it. The place where my heart is at the moment, teaching-wise, is the Piet Zwart Institute in Rotterdam. Awesome place, apply. When I try to talk about work that matters to me, like the work of Geoffrey Farmer, I usually feel that I don't do the work a service when I try to say what the work means. I feel more like I owe it to the work to somehow articulate why I feel it matters, by somehow trying to describe what might be at stake in the work. When you speak in that way, it's usually rather speculative, no? Because when you speak about what you think might matter, you have to risk some conjectures. And to articulate what might matter in a work, actually you usually also have to reach out beyond the work. Because things that matter, at least that's how I experience it in works, are usually things that are somehow in the air, or that arrive in the work and have taken a long time in coming. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first of all claim that what is at stake in Geoffrey Farmer's work is the miraculous, for want of a better term. Could also call it the wondrous or the awesome, but I call it the miraculous. And I try to somehow articulate what that might imply. By reaching out to other examples, going a bit back in history, to see how the miraculous has been fought and suppressed, and how the miraculous has been articulated, to somehow build a context around the work in which it hopefully might become clear in what particular manner Geoffrey Farmer articulates his sense of the wondrous, of the miraculous, and what might be implied in his particular manner of performing it in the work that I guess you've all seen upstairs. The talk is basically divided into 3 sections. I want to start by talking about the enemies of the miraculous. And my intuition is that the enemies of the miraculous are use value and representation. In the second part, I want to ask the question whether it's actually possible to embody the miraculous. Can we embody the miraculous? Is that possible? And the third part, I want to move from the enemies of the miraculous to the friends of the miraculous. It's actually the longest part in the talk. And the friends, my intuition is, are things, magic, and dolls. And I want to bring out through artists and writers as friends and associates of the miraculous, which is the Baroness von Elsa von Freytag-Loringhofen, Kathy Acker, and Jim Henson. So basically, these are the 3 parts. and that was the miraculous. Basically, my sense of the miraculous is it's something of which we know how it works, but that still surprises us every time. That strange moment when a thing starts to talk, that uncanny moment when suddenly an egg timer starts ringing and a thing starts doing its own thing. No, a thing that starts doing its own thing, the moment that things become animated, that's the miraculous. One possible way of looking at it. Why are representation and use value the enemies of the miraculous? Because the miraculous is never quite what it is. No, this is a duck, and it is not a duck, because this is the sound that a duck makes, but it's not a duck sound. Yeah? So we know that Ducky makes a sound that is not a ducky sound. That's why we love Ducky in the bathtub. Yeah? That's why Ducky is miraculous in the bathtub, because Ducky is super Ducky, but not quite Ducky. Yeah? So one casual definition for the miraculous is that it is what it isn't and it isn't what it is. Again, it is what it isn't and it isn't what it is. That's what makes Ducky so special, no? That's not a duck, but it's Ducky. When we deal with the miraculous in the key of something that is what it isn't and isn't what it is, that immediately puts us in trouble with two expectations that art usually has to face as an embodiment of the miraculous. That on the one hand, you have let's say here in this picture is mainly white Anglo-Saxon Protestant working class population that wants to know what something is good for. Yeah? How it works, what it's good for, what its use is. And it wants to know that not just of things, but also of people. No, if you're respectable, you're not like a fag or anything, but you're good for something. No, you do your job, you can prove that you're good for something. You don't just bum around. Same thing with art. It has to prove that it's good for something. That's the one expectation, that the use value of art should be proven, that you show what it is in terms of use. And if it isn't what it is, it's some kind of gay thing that you don't want to be involved in. On the other hand, that's not the only demand that art faces. There's a second demand which comes from a different class, usually the middle to upper class, that lives in a world where use value has basically been taken care of, so they're basically interested in semiotic value. Money is not an issue, money is there, but what you need is status and representation. So to figure out what something is means to figure out what it represents and what its status is. Yeah? You wouldn't use it for anything anyway because your servants are doing that for you, but what you're actually interested in is what the symbolic capital value, the status and representation is. And you're equally bored with stuff that isn't quite what it is because you can't make use of it within your particular economy of status and representation. So here we have the two enemies of the miraculous because they both insist that a thing should be what it is. One faction, one class insists that it should identify itself clearly in terms of its use. The other class wants it to identify itself in terms of what it represents. So we understand that even people who absolutely have no clue whatsoever of what art is about still want to read it. Yeah? And that the upper class, in that sense, with its fixation on symbolic value, also gives the cue to much academic criticism, because the academic criticism is equally interested in the semiotic value of art. So even the most critical criticism sometimes just apes the discourse of the rich in terms of trying to desperately qualify what something represents and nail it, what the semiotic value is. In either case, we have a pressure to identify what something is, which then puts the interpreter, like myself, in a difficult position because you constantly have to explain something that is fantastic because it is what it isn't and isn't what it is, just in terms of what it is. So you talk to the one side and tell, yeah, it represents this, that's the significance of it, that's the signifier, that's the sign, that's the symbolic status and value. Very interesting. And then you talk back to the other side and tell them what it's good for. And that's usually happening not so much in the gallery, but I don't know, in the dinner from hell with your in-laws or something, no? Where you try to prove that you're actually good for something because what you do has a place in the world. Then you realize how some of the most successful players in the art of the 20th century managed to brilliantly have it both ways. I'm almost in awe of somebody who's such an incredible player like Robert Morris, who just came up with the perfect formula to make work that basically has it both ways, that has the cake and eats it constantly, by having minimal art advance, on the one hand, a proposition to the utilitarian-minded working people, saying like, no, it's about your body. It's about the here and now. It's about your body and material American values in the gallery space. All right, we understand that. Tell it like it is, okay? And then you can talk to the others. No, it's actually about institutional critique. It's about showing how the institutional space generates symbolic value. Oh yeah, okay, we have some of that. So then you have kind of Robert Morris kind of beautifully playing it in all directions. You can explain the same work into both directions, and it ends up being the same cube, because fundamentally, of course, it's a mirror. The best way to deal with false expectations is to just mirror them back to people. That's the great secret of Robert Morris. If you're dealing with expectations that are impossible to fulfill, just mirror them back to the people who place them on you. So you put a mirror in a box that mirrors the white box back to the white box, and you are set. You want to have a seat? So we have an example of someone who's been successfully taking up a lot of space in art history precisely by giving people nothing. That's the great secret to how you deal with false expectations, because the problem is everybody has something. Everybody have what they need and deserve already. No, some have work, others have money. Yeah? So everybody's got something. So what they're actually looking for, and here the eurythmics were wrong, it's not like everybody's looking for something, everybody's looking for nothing. Because everybody has something already, and the one thing that they cannot have is nothing. So the best way how you deal with people who have too much of something is that you play nothing back to them, which is what Robert Morris fantastically does. No, a cube in a cube with mirrors, the perfect nothing for everybody. And I think that's a battle line, if you want. No, the battle line lies not just between, in this kind of thin space, in the wrench between the pressure of the utilitarian cult of use value and the capitalist cult of semiotic value and status, but it's also about how you deal with these pressures, whether you actually just play people for their own stupidity and give them exactly what they want, nothing, or whether you still maintain the idiotic desire to give people something. Because that's the thing, no? The miraculous is always something. Ducky is always something, no? That makes Ducky so beautifully idiotic. Ducky is not a mirror cube, no? It's something that you can touch, it's something that makes a sound. Like Ducky is obscenely something, as an opposite to nothing. So I think one of the biggest challenges after minimal art is whether you are actually with the Robert Morris urban player types that give people what they want, nothing, or whether you insist on the miraculous as that which, in a most profane manner, refuses to be identified in terms of representation or use value. And I have a lot of respect for Geoffrey Farmer, because in a funny sense, I think he still insists on giving people not just something, but way too much of something. No, well, you can. I mean, I've just seen Philippe Parreno in the Palais de Tokyo, and it's amazing how much space you can fill with nothing. and it's very, very seductive. Yeah, it's really exquisite. And then I think in comparison to that, one should appreciate the joyfulness of like heaps and heaps of something. But how do you talk about something? How do you build a conversation around something when you don't want to talk about that something which is miraculous in terms of what it represents or in terms of what it's good for? Usually the talk of something has its own passion. And the passion of something, the passion of the miraculous is always something slightly idiotic, because it's always in the process of becoming what it is about. So at some point, somebody who's about something usually stops communicating because he's so excited about something that he turns into something, and in that moment, of course, you don't actually follow what the person says. It's like when somebody is so excited about showing you the way that at some point you will just watch that person's finger and, of course, have no idea where the fucking train station is. So I think one model about for talking about something is becoming something.
Si no sabemos mantener el tiempo y llevar un tiempo muy sólido y bien tocado, no va a ser sencillo que podamos tocar el violín en una orquesta con músicos de verdad. Entonces vamos a empezar por ver cómo se coge la baqueta, cómo se coge el ruido, luego hacemos unos 2 o 3 ejercicios que nos permiten desarrollar el dominio del instrumento y luego tocamos el ritmo básico del violín. La baqueta, como podemos ver, es una baqueta delgada, muy parecida a una baqueta de batería, y la vamos a coger de igual manera.
But that's usually how it is, no? Like when somebody is into something, like you feel like, oh, for fuck's sake, finally, please start playing. But they won't. No, they're much too busy becoming that thing. So I won't touch you any longer. I want to move to the second part, to say, when we play this thing, when we want to show that we owe something to the miraculous, can we become that thing? Is it possible to embody the miraculous? Because there is a loophole, even in the most literal-minded white Anglo-Saxon Protestant discourse, there is always a loophole, an exit or entry to the miraculous. And I was talking to Geoffrey Farmer about it, and he was saying, like, for him it was that moment when he first heard Buddy Holly on the car radio. And you have that thing which is on the one hand totally part of material culture, but then you hear this voice of which you really don't know what it is. Whoa! What is this? Yeah, when somebody produces sounds, when words dissolve into sounds that are between spoken language, between something really inarticulate, between a sound a human would make and something entirely otherworldly. And Geoffrey was saying that for him, kind of that experience of listening to Buddy Holly was exactly that moment when you have an experience of something that is what it isn't and isn't what it is, the voice of Buddy Holly. And so these moments, these loopholes, where you have a first-hand experience of that which is what it isn't and isn't what it is, are of course everywhere. They're in your bathtub, but they are also on the radio and on TV, because there is something particular precisely about North American culture that while on the one hand it insists on being one of the most literal-minded in the world, it constantly also courts and celebrates the miraculous in the form of the worker who can perform magic. And this is one example of someone who's a hard-working man, a real guy, but who is the daddy that you want to have because he can turn anything into anything. He can turn that what it is into something that isn't what it is and is what it isn't. And it's Gene Kelly, of course. And that's a wonderful example of daddy working the magic.
Oh, Artie. Yeah, Joe? Let everything go. I'll close up. Oh, okay. Good night, Joe. Good night.
So that is a very compelling example of the miraculous emerging from the heart of material culture. The context of the scene is that the theater is about to go bankrupt and he has to come up with a money-making scheme. So of course, in the end, what he sees in the newspaper on the floor will be what saves the theater. So magic is performed from within the pressure to prove that you're useful, but it actually enhances your potency to be useful. I was told by a student, Kirsty Roberts, who originally showed me that clip, and then also by Linda Quinlan, that I hadn't checked that, but that in Ireland, for instance, Gene Kelly was so popular and no one would ask, what is this queer prancing about? Because yes, it embodies an ideal of a man who can work the magic. So even if he's doing queer stuff and getting involved in things that are what they aren't and aren't what they are, he can still make the magic work and prove his manhood, that he's a good man, a good father, by saving the day in the act of performing magic. I have to say my grandfather was exactly like that. So he got the family through the post-war years materially, but destroyed it psychologically. Because could you imagine living next to someone who constantly performs magic? Is that really possible? somebody who comes home and has embodied the worker all day and then embodies the entertainer when he comes home. It's a full-time job, not just for the one who performs. Other embodiments of exactly that dream of the working man who can also be the magician, because he's a virtuoso. He can work it while performing the magic. Of course, is Liberace. No? Somebody who can show that he's got the skills that pay the bills, but at the same time, of course, he's got the magic touch. He can be both, no? The worker and the magic man. Another go-between, another loophole to the magical and miraculous in the heart of material culture. And yes, of course, also Frank Zappa. Yeah, another virtuoso that I guess for that very reason Geoffrey Farmer picked as a, can I say, a foil, a blueprint, a cliche for building the work that you see upstairs dedicated to Zappa as a modern musical magician who insisted, like Liberace or Gene Kelly, on actually embodying that magic. Yeah? So while on the one hand Zappa is constantly mocking himself, mocking his own genius, mocking his own virtuosity, of course, in all kinds of poses. I think there was a time, I don't know how it was in Britain, but you couldn't go into a single German youth club without finding that poster somewhere. And unfortunately, I don't have older brothers, but all my friends that had older brothers who had Zappa records, had Zappa records and no girlfriends, but at least had Zappa records. It seemed symptomatic because it seemed to be representative of a man who's so obsessed with making and mocking the magic that he can produce that he builds an entire solipsistic universe around himself and his magic. On the one hand, of course, to great effect. One cannot deny the genius of Zappa, but at the same time, there is also that kind of undeniable fact that Zappa embodies the melancholy of the male genius who gets so obsessed with embodying his own virtuosity that he somehow gets sidetracked into the most banal impasses. No? And in that sense, when Zappa appears up there in the work, my intuition is that it is not necessarily as a good example, but it might actually be deliberately as a wrong example, to point to one manner, one fashion, one key, one mode in which the miraculous exists in popular North American culture, as something freaky, something psychedelic, as something wild, as something eccentric and wonderful on the one hand, but still tied back to a particular idea of what a man can do and what a man must do. So that at the end, you could argue that there is also something so sad about Frank Zappa, Frank's use value, and the magical value coexist in the same object. You can catch a frog, but you can also celebrate Carnival. In a fantastic book called Mimesis and Alterity, Michael Tausig talks a lot about the way how tribal magic survives in contemporary everyday culture in different countries, and how it usually exists on exactly that level, where an object means what it means and it also doesn't mean what it means. It exists in different modalities. For instance, there might be these turtles that are actually used for attracting and catching turtles, but at the same time, they're also magical objects used for healing purposes. And what's important to understand about that is that we're entering a different field of pragmatics, where the miraculous is actually very close to something pragmatic because you do magic on an everyday basis. One example that, which I particularly like, that Michael Tausig formulates, or is it's in a, I think it's, Jesus, where is it? It's in a South American country where one fidelity magic ritual is that you need to get the pubic hair from your husband and grind it into his coffee while you say 10 times, hijo de puta, hijo de puta. And of course, you can do that in the morning when you fix breakfast. Yeah, it's entirely pragmatic, while it is the enactment of the miraculous, of course. And on that level, we arrive at an understanding of the pragmatic, which is not necessarily white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, where the use value is in a career teleology. But no, the use value is the magical value. No, and the magical value is the use value. The difference is completely sublated into something that you actually do without necessarily thinking too much about it, because it's time to fix breakfast. And on the same level, when you go into voodoo and juju magic, you have all these objects returning that on the one hand are pragmatically fixed. You can go to a market and have someone fix you a juju in, I don't know, half a day. But at the same time, of course, they constantly tap into the world where everything is what it isn't and isn't what it is, because everything, on the one hand, exists for practical purposes. If you want to get bulletproof, you have to get a juju that makes you bulletproof because it includes a bullet. Totally pragmatic. While on the other hand, of course, it's a world of fear, death, spirits, demons, where every object is inhabited by a ghost. A demon, a spirit, on the one hand, and on the other hand, it's something that you get in 6 hours at the market. So I'm not an expert on that. I'm just reading Michael Tausig, but it strikes me that here we have an opening from a product culture, a carnival culture, into something that is fundamentally a magic that never left the material world. And there is a lot of talk about object-oriented philosophy at the moment, but I always feel like when we talk about object orientation and material having a life of its own, we have to face that we enter into the twilight zone where things are what they are and then aren't what they are, because every little object has a soul. Sometimes, and then again not, but it depends on which hour of the day or like how you activate it and so on. Difficult, very, very complicated, but practiced on a daily level. So, and for me, that's a little bit like the West Coast spirit. I mean, that's a cliche, I'm sorry, but in Geoffrey Farmer's work, where you understand that the existence, the coexistence of material culture and magical culture is something that you can tap into as an everyday practice. I had this experience of being in Vancouver, and we went together to a store where movie companies that sell off their props after the movie is shot sell it off for retail, where Farmer also gets a lot of his material. And you realize that is exactly the threshold between the magical world of the movie and houses and houses full of stuff awaiting to be brought back to life, waiting to be animated when it's practically dead. So objects that live in this kind of strange zombie state between ready to become alive and sinking back into the sleep of a dead prop. And for me, that is the key in which this go-between practice could be enacted on a daily level. You perform of turning objects into something that is what it isn't and isn't what it is by scratching an itch. Yeah? It's an everyday carnivalesque practice that doesn't need particularly dates and incentives to rehearse the magic of the material. That's someone who has a lot of videos on the internet. If you can find her under Chica Guerra, and you can find her at home just playing this thing. With or without a fan blowing her hair. I think it's beautiful. For me, that's the ideal of an artistic practice, yeah? What I would subscribe to. And which for me also captures a particular casual spirit of animating the magic of the object that I find at the heart of the avant-garde scenario in New York, in the 1920s. Here you see the Baroness Elsa von Freytag-Loringhofen, who arguably is the person who invented the ready-made. she was friends with Marcel Duchamp, and I assume on Saturday afternoons they were, or other times of the day, they were hanging out together and horsing around together, dressing up together. As you can see here, that's the Baroness on the one side, turning herself into a miraculous object, and that's Duchamp as Rose de la Vie, using the same fabric, as you can see in the hat, in his head, that the Baroness a moment ago had on her top. In the middle, you see one of the first ready-mades, which is a homage to Marcel Duchamp, where the Baroness basically just took down her feathers and took parts of that previously adorned her body and put them together as an art piece and immediately made it a gift. No, that's the magic of the object that you give to the other in the moment when you take it from your body, and where it on the one hand sits there as a dead vase photographed by Man Ray, and on the other hand, no, it is the spirit of Marcel Duchamp caught in a dream catcher. No, a spirit-catching ghost trap animated object where you capture the spirit of the guy and give it back to the guy. In the same way that, I mean, there are rumors that the Baroness actually gave the pissoir to Duchamp because they had a way of making toilet jokes together. So there are lots of jokes about plumbing. Yeah, plumbing. Yeah. On the one hand, it's from the same year as the Urinoir, this kind of plumbing sculpture by the Baroness called Trap. Trap and Fountain, two jokes about what happens when we do what we do and don't quite know what gets us there. So toilet jokes at the heart of the ready-made history, but toilet jokes that are an obscene, profane, casual way of tapping into the animatedness, the miraculous magic of the thing. And I find a lot with the kind of turning sticks and various erectile movements that are automatically Ecktimer-like happening upstairs. We have a lot of cable and plumbing happening up there that, for me, speaks of a similar spirit where the miraculous shares a toilet with the obscene. Another friend of that particular form of the profanely miraculous is Kathy Acker, with whom Geoffrey Farmer studied in California. Kathy Acker, poet, writer, performer, is very, very difficult to understand, and I can't claim that I do. Because what you get in Kathy Acker is someone who, on the one hand, is exactly working the magic of the toilet joke. A lot of her novels were banned because of obscenity. But at the same time, she has a way of building these kind of spirit catchers by stealing texts from other people and building, as it were, books like voodoo dolls. So she got sued for what's the word, when you steal from other people? Plagiarism, yeah? Because of course in the legal system where where representation and status matters, the moment that you build dolls out of other people's bodies, you're not performing magic, you're performing theft. Yeah? But in one of her essays, she speaks about this practice of building dolls, of building something that people would associate with her as a writer because the author must be identical with the work, but which is actually always and only a doll, where in the act of writing you produce something that is what it isn't and isn't what it is, because you speak with a voice that becomes yours because it isn't yours. So to quote a little bit from Kathy Acker, when she speaks about the practice of an artist building dolls, she writes, "Capital," and she speaks of herself as capital. "Capital is an artist who makes dolls, makes, damages, transforms, smashes. One of her dolls is a writer doll. The writer doll isn't very large and is all hair, horse mane hair, red fur, dirty human hair, pussy." Sorry. Capital made a publisher look like Sam Peckinpah, though she had no idea what Sam Peckinpah looked like, had looked like. She took a Howdy Dowdy doll and Alfred E. Neumann doll and mashed them together, then made this conglomerate into an American officer in the Mexican-American War. Actually sued she hated sewing, or when she became tired of sewing, glued together with her own two hands, just as the early American patriot wives used to do for their patriot husbands. A frogged and braided cavalry jacket stained with the blood from some former owners. Then fashioned a stovepipe hat out of one she had stolen from a bum in an ecstasy of art. The hat was a bit big for the publisher. Inside a gold heart, there should be a picture of a woman. Since Capital didn't have a picture of a woman, she put in one of her mother. Since Sam Peckinpah, or her publisher, had seen tragedy, an arrow hanging out of the white breast of a soldier, no older than a child, horses gone mad, wellied mouth frothing amid dust thicker than the smoke of guns. She made his face full of folds, an eye patch over one eye. Capital made a doll who was a journalist. Capital loved making dolls who were journalists. Sometimes she made them out of the newspapers found in trash cans or on the streets. She knew that lots of cats inhabited trash cans. The papers said rats carry diseases. She made this journalist out of the fingernails she obtained by hanging around the trash cans in the backlots of London hospitals. Had penetrated these backlots with the hope of meeting mean older men bikers. Found lots of other things there. Since, to make the journalist, she molded the fingernails together with superglue, and being a slob, lots of other things stuck to this superglue. The journalist didn't look anything like a human being. So the entire business of reading and interpreting is turned into a doll's play, where the magic of the poetry of that glued together material is, yes, that it's puppet speaking. And if I should be honest, of course, I should now continue this talk in the spirit of Casey Acker by disappearing and... but I think I haven't reached that point of avant-gardism yet. Next time. That is one thing where you actually see a particular working method emerge of taking history from the trash cans and gluing it together in so many dolls that are you and not you, good and bad examples, where someone like Frank Zappa would actually lend itself as an example precisely because he's the most obscenely stupid doll that you can possibly get. He's such an artist man doll who's so in love with himself and his own obscenity that you have to take him. You have to this is the most unlikely mask that you can get, so you take it. Because it's all dolls and patchwork, but that doesn't mean that there's any less feeling in it, because the feeling comes with the magic and the way how you work the props. That's the point. One last thing about obscenity that is particularly special to Kathy Acker, but very hard to understand, and again, I can't claim to fully understand it, because on a certain level, Kathy Acker takes this back to this. Somehow she manages to write novels that are so incredibly mind-numbingly pornographic that at some point they actually become innocent again. There's only a certain amount of times that you have to use the words dig, suck, fuck. When you just turn it into rhythm, at some point you just hear like almost the rustle of the leaves, and everything that has that kind of material significance suddenly turns into just simply a sound that is as innocent as the sound of a hand knocking on wood. Because on a higher level, then when you realize that that moment of things being what they are and aren't what they are, can be pushed to such extremes that how shall I describe it? That the kind of the fuse pops, where the light goes out, and you are in a situation where you are like in a blissful state. Giorgio Agamben beautifully writes about that the Catholic Church unfortunately has just shut it down. Limbo. Ever heard about Limbo? Limbo is for the children that die when they're too young to have sinned, but who haven't been Christian yet. So they can neither go to heaven nor to hell. That used to be a big problem for the church, so they invented Limbo, where all those creatures go that are neither guilty nor free nor ready for salvation. They can neither be saved nor condemned. So on that level, they are an embodiment of non-identity. They are what they are and aren't what they are. They're kind of innocent, guilty, guilty, innocent. But on such a level, they're usually represented as just little heads fluttering about. Yeah? And sometimes I think that with someone upstairs or with Kathy Acker, to push non-identity to a point where you end in limbo can also mean gaining a strange form of new innocence at the heart of something that is obscenely fractured. But that would be for further discussion of Kathy Acker. One last friend of the miraculous that the piece upstairs might be seen to be a kind of a massive homage to, and I totally share the fascination, is Jim Henson. This is from the Muppet Workshop of Jim Henson. If you think about it, arguably one of the most successful, touching left-wing project of emancipatory culture to emerge from the post-war years is Sesame Street and the Muppet Show. Because here a world is performed that is utterly miraculous, where everything is puppets squeaking and making kind of sometimes really bizarre and obscene sounds, and we'll get to that in a moment, while at the same time transporting a fundamental utopian message that it's okay. No, I shouldn't say it's okay. That sounds too much like bad hippie talk. That it's a way to live. No, it's a way to live that is also not linked to one particular embodiment only. You don't have to be Henson. You don't have to be a hero to take the puppet, because there are so many Muppets that you have an entire republic, an entire country of these strange creatures that are what they aren't and aren't what they are. Kermit is Henson, Henson is Kermit. Inseparable, a state of pleasurable non-identity at the heart of modern Enlightenment discourse. The frog that talks, the frog that seduces you into education, the frog that is pushed into desperation repeatedly by an obscene monster that only wants cookie, and constantly short circuits the discourse of education and shows the teacher as helpless, while at the same time, of course, also undefeatable. Kermit will never give up. He's the journalist, he's the thinker, he's the person who communicates, while and that's the wisdom of Henson, he communicates in the face of his own stupidity. There's always that moment when Kermit loses it, where you realize, of course, it's in vain. But at the same time, of course, he continues speaking in the face of this plush-covered hole that keeps opening and shutting and demanding cookie. Yeah? There is a moment when this miraculous, beautiful, cute, but also obscene thing then also touches on something that is actually a little bit more scary, because that animatedness of the puppet that on the one hand produces discourse and on the other hand resists discourse, asking for cookie, also travels into realms where things somewhat get traumatic. In the previous version of the piece upstairs, there was one moving element dedicated to Snuffleupagus. Do I pronounce that correctly? Snuffleupagus. We didn't have them in Germany. Snuffleupagus. Snuffleupagus. Yeah, thanks, okay. The moment where Snuffleupagus and Frank Zappa actually cross paths is the year when Frank Zappa is taken to court for fighting kind of obscenity charges. And in the Sesame Street, there is there's a big discussion because Snuffleupagus is Big Bird's imaginary friend. The running joke is that nobody sees, the grown-ups don't see him, and Big Bird is constantly in trouble trying to make it clear to the adults that he's not just imagining things. So there was a big discussion in the 70s where people were saying, okay, this is problematic because there are too many cases of child abuse being taken to court in America, and you realize that children are afraid to talk. And so then they basically said, Snuffleupagus might actually encourage children to hold on to imaginary friends rather than talk to their parents. So Snuffleupagus should have his come out. And there's a really touching moment. It's actually really dramatic when Snuffleupagus then meets the adults. And the trauma is as much in the coming out as in the utter weirdness of that creature. One of the last slides I will show you is I will give you a little bit of the Snuffleupagus. Traumatic, cute, funny, and again, like the gyro, it is what it is, and that it isn't what it is. It's not a pipe, but what you see.
Where did that Snuffleupagus go? I wish the others could have seen. Oh, there you are. Oh, hi there. Oh, come on over. Oh, boy, am I glad to see you again.
Hello, Bird.
Oh, hi, Mr. Snuffleupagus. It's nice to have you back. The others didn't think that you were really here.
Yes.
But I believe that you're here.
Well,
I told them all about you, and
I see.
and they didn't believe that you were actually here. And where did you go?
Well, I suppose so.
Well, I think we better say goodbye. Goodbye.
Sesame Street has been brought to you today by the letter M and by the number 2. Sesame Street is a production of the Children's Television Workshop.
And you can't help thinking that in that moment, the miraculous plays instantly into the absolute uncanny and scary, because this kind of double scrotal monstrosity that talks with a voice that you wouldn't have on children's TV today anymore is as much an embodiment of the fearful as of the domesticity of the fearful. It's really the unheimlich, it's homey, it's the ghost that you have at home or in your toilet. And searching through different toilets today, I found this thing in a charity shop around the corner. It's a doll made for the year 2000, and I think it's the next best thing to... And that's the one thing about from the egg timer to the ghost, that it won't stop. It will always come back. It will always come back with another voice, and it doesn't matter that the year 2000 is over. It will always come back and sing its song. That's the scary thing. Like the machine, the automaton, has its own particular sense of timing, and that makes the obscene joy of it. But that's also the deeply scary thing about it. I mean, you could probably build an entire movie on the doll. Yeah? Just imagine, like Hollywood movie, the Millennium Bug really happened. Anyone who wants to shoot that movie, I'll give them the doll afterwards. Yeah? And I think what's so great about someone like Jim Henson is that while he constantly deals with the cute, with the obscene, and the scary of that side of the miraculous, he never denies it. He never denies its place. There will be a lot of clean encouragement pedagogy that would never dare to basically give that much room to its other. The obscenity, the stupidity, the fun, and the scariness of that thing that is what it isn't and isn't what it is. And again, we have a particular, it's not just learning, it's a way of speaking about the thing by being the thing, where you, on the one hand, you don't give up the need to speak, but on the other hand, you fully engage, entertain, and embrace that other thing that keeps being present in its cuteness, obscenity, and uncanniness. And for me, it's one of my big, das darf nicht wahr sein, heroes in terms of intellectual discourse are the Yip Yips, and I'll leave you with that as a last example of a discourse of friends of the thing. So I guess that would be an example of a convincing art critical discourse, of which I'm not entirely sure whether I delivered that tonight, but I still thank you for your attention.
Wow. Thank you, that was compelling. I don't know where to start from nothing with something that it is or isn't. It's all a bit of a whirl. But even just picking up on, I suppose, how you've approached Geoffrey's work in terms of the catalogue essay and how you've approached this talk in quite a performative manner and taking quite a creative stance in deconstructing it. I found that quite an interesting introduction in terms of the catalogue essay, where you introduce everybody to the characters, you give them functions and traits, and it was a very playful way to introduce the work. And I wondered if Geoffrey Farmer's work kind of encouraged a different type of writing for you in that respect.
It's on the one hand an encouragement, but that's speaking from the writer's perspective. But of course, it's also demand. Yeah? Where you suddenly realize, no, this is, in terms of what I tried to say in the very beginning, this is what it puts at stake. Yeah? It challenges you to change your writing, because you realize that any kind of straightforward interpretative text would just be wrong. And then you also realize how particular forms of introducing the thing that exist, for instance, in child's play, are actually quite deep. You know, what would you do when you approach a work like Upstairs? But no, the same thing that any child does, but introduce the character. No, this is mommy, this is daddy, and this is the Pope. And then you can act towards it.
Yeah. Because I think that idea of acting and enacting, when you talked about almost a threat to the miraculous, in that it occupies this space, and when it's fully embodied, it almost loses itself. It becomes this commodity that can be bought and sold, I suppose. And perhaps with what Geoffrey does Upstairs in taking on the persona or taking on Frank Zappa is distancing yourself from that and almost occupying a safe space by putting somebody else at the fore, in the same way that Kathy Acker does that with her writing, by adopting the work. It's like using language in that way that you say, like scratching at something. She's taking pre-existing text and using that as a facade and adopting that safe space, maybe, in order for the miraculous to occur.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, obviously, I can only speculate because I can't look into people's heads. But I wouldn't see it. I mean, a lot of kind of the traditional vocabulary of criticism is all about an empathy where there's critical distance. But when it comes to magic and the mimetic, that doesn't make any sense anymore. No, you engage with things on a level where imitating the other is also becoming other, and which is not necessarily a form of distancing, but where you realize that the only way how you can approach the thing is by getting outside yourself into that thing and becoming something in the process. And that's one thing, and the other problem is I think an artistic problem, or also kind of for a speaker, is the risk of becoming too good at something. Because then at some point you get it, you can do it, and I'm sure you all know the sense of infinite boredom and disgust that gets you when you realize, God, yeah, okay, I did it again, me, haha. Yeah? That's the
idea of complacence then, and what you're...
Yeah, but you realize that you just put the product on the table. Yeah? And in the moment when this thing is fractured, you kind of dissolve between too many dolls, which I think to some degree is happening upstairs and also happening with Kathy Acker, that you put something into your way deliberately, like Frank Zappa. Like you have really no interest in listening to Zappa, and then you force yourself to build a work that that approaches this guy. Yeah?
Yeah.
So where you whoops a lot. But then you basically some kind of ghost.
That's your miraculous occurring.
Hi, Kathy. But that's another thing. No, when you speak in the name of someone, it's dangerous. Like even when you throw yourself into that kind of strange mix of becoming, when you speak too forthright, the ghost might call you. Maybe it was Frank Zappa saying, like, dude, you really got me wrong. It's dangerous. No, and that's not a safety zone. Yeah. When you engage a ghost, it might come and get you. Because you have to be held accountable for what you say, after all, for all the dolls in the end, of course.
It's a different thing when you talk about somebody like Michael Tausig, who's an anthropologist and is talking about rituals and if you're embodying somebody, but then possession is maybe a very different thing. That's almost entirely giving yourself over and allowing whatever comes out in some respect.
On the one hand, that's what you need to do. Tausig gives an example, for instance, of a medicine man getting kind of a healing juice out of a plant. And to make the plant provide that juice, he has to dress up like a plant, put on perfume to seduce the plant, and sing to the plant a song about the plant. And only when the plant is sufficiently charmed by hearing a story about itself, will it give the juice with its healing purposes, So and of course that's a model for art interpretation. Or you sing to the tree so that it gives you the juice. Which is one thing, but then also Tausig mentions that there is many stories of shamans while invoking spirits that they get taken away by the spirits. So it can go either way. If you enter the twilight zone where everything material is also full of soul, you might end up on the wrong end of the threshold and never get back into the material world. I don't know exactly how to translate that, but it's usually we think kind of playful is not risky. You're either serious and responsible, or playful and irresponsible. Yeah. But I think there is this kind of when you think it from the perspective of engaging the miraculous on the mimetic level. On the one hand, the playful is the only way. The spirits only come out when you play with them. But that doesn't mean that you wouldn't potentially end up in a trap with the ghost coming to get you.
I was thinking as well about the necessity for the opposite, the thing that is what it isn't in order.
Yeah.
And if, in order for the miraculous to occur, there is that necessary enemy of minimalist sculpture, say. But also, how does there was almost a slightly melancholic approach in the middle where it seemed like there was no hope for the miraculous either, that it will always be assumed by commodity and becoming a thing, becoming something, then that can be.
No, it's right. I would identify myself as a declared enemy of minimalism. Like I think like we still have to unmake the damage that people like Robert Morris made. I'm serious. Yeah? But on the other hand, the melancholy bit, I'm also a bit of an unreconstructed Adornian. And when Adorno writes about the mimetic and the magic, he writes about it as that which constantly constitutes an underbelly, the underbelly of art and discourse. And where I think there's a beautiful line by Adorno where he said, art is magic freed from the obligation to be the truth. But he does that with a melancholy key because I don't think that, he in a way proposes that there's no way that you could straightforwardly tap back into that and recuperate it. But it's a way that you constantly have to kind of linger on that threshold between Kermit and Cookie Monster. And everything that Adorno says is, to a certain degree, beautifully enacted by Henson. I also totally adore Susan Hiller, who I think in her work does the same, and she once called it moving sideways in a conversation we did. So moving sideways between the discursive frog reporter and let's say a solidarity with the monster. That as a dialectical operation, I think that would be Adorno's theory and Henson's practice. So you babble to voice a solidarity, of course, that you also destroy by talking too much. While you can at some point just hold up the puppet and say it's still there.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
I wonder, at that point, should we open out to questions from the audience? There are roving mics on either side, so I don't know if anybody has any comments or questions.
Come on, guys. Yeah,
There we go.
yeah.
What is the relation for you of the miraculous with the absurdity? Sorry. What is for you the relation or the role of the absurdity in relation with the miraculous?
Thank you. This is a fantastic question. I completely love absurdity, but almost in a spiritual key. I'm not so well read in Russian literature, but the reason why I really absolutely enjoy Russian, Polish humor is when people get spiritual in the moment when they're absurd. I think Jewish humor also has that very strong. They're beautiful jokes that are absolutely absurd, but also very, very spiritual. I think Dostoevsky is incredibly spiritual while celebrating the utter absurdity of an existence that fails to come to a match with itself. You know? That the God in the gutter, strange, that it precisely in the moment when things don't make sense in such an intense manner that you feel like an existential rift that couldn't be bigger, then that might actually be spiritual. No? Like when it absolutely makes no sense, but in the most painful and mind-numbing way, that's that can turn from where depression turns into exuberance. I mean, I can't help laughing about the fact that the summer hit has Get Lucky has a bit of French philosophy in it. No, that when he goes the gift that keeps on giving, and I think absurdity can be that gift that keeps on giving. And one of my favorite jokes, Russian joke told to me by someone in Bratislava, Boris Ondrejka. It's more like a parable than a joke, but for me it captures that kind of strange absurdity of the gift that keeps on giving, where God is a hedgehog. So it's two guys somewhere in Siberia fishing. And suddenly a hedgehog comes out of the shrubbery and comes over to them, goes like, "Hey guys, do you have some Scotch tape?" And they go like, "No." And then the hedgehog disappears into a bush and comes back with some Scotch tape and says, "No, you do." That's divine, if you want. It's also Soviet planning, but it's the gift you cannot refuse, your existence. That would be, but we could take it much further with better jokes in terms of, like usually we hold absurdity against religion, but in the enactment also of this kind of, I don't know, hijo de puta coffee making, that it is religion. Like it's to solve the contradictions of your married life, you enact that contradiction with a kind of intensity that is on the one hand casual and then like deeply spiritual. Because you act in the gap between, you act in the heart of difference or something like that. So yes, another long conversation. Spiritual absurdity, absurd spirituality.
Yeah.
I was just wondering how you feel about, because you put an awful lot of thought into going, not necessarily decoding, or anyway, you've done. I haven't seen this Farmer guy before, and the thing that was what I enjoyed about it was my naivety to it, and how this is not turning into a question. It is that.
Basically,
but do you feel like you're still getting pleasure out of the work?
Yeah, totally.
Is it losing its magic as you go about it, or learn? I'm usually better.
No, I mean, like, I get what you're saying. I mean, like, because a lot of what I've been invoking is in the beginning, it was naivety, no? Like the joy of Ducky that goes quack. Can you preserve that joy of Ducky? And I think you can. I mean, I mean, for me, that work is a gift that keeps on giving. I really enjoy it. But I think the question, I mean, what do we expect from enjoyment? Is it the ever new, or is it also that strange enjoyment that you get every time you say "fuck a duck"? That it's that you know what I mean? There's something about, like we on the one hand we associate naivety with freshness, that it's totally fresh. I once had a French student who I tried every trick in the book to make him read philosophy, but and he was always saying, "I don't care if it's not fresh." Yeah? And that's a position where you would insist on, like, it has to be fresh. But on the other hand, I feel like the path that you can go when thinking about obscenity, the endless joys of a particular thing that you put it in your mouth and you say it again. There is something about the continuous engagement of a term when you say it in a way that it never completely fills up with meaning. That's maybe the discipline that you also have to kind of stop yourself from getting to the point when you said it so convincingly that it only means what it means. And to me, like the work keeps on pushing the point where it never entirely means what it means, and therefore kind of keeps that joy alive of looking at it again, spending time in there, speaking about it in a way that I know that I will always partially miss it and partially meet it. So in that sense, on the one hand, I think that there is a lot to be said for this kind of, for the fresh. And I have to say, like, for me, the French student was really, I appreciate that resistance. I don't care if it's not fresh. And he was right. And on the other hand, I realized that there are forms of perpetual engagement where the honking of the horn is appropriate as long as it continuously stays partially inappropriate. And I think there is also a way for continued engagement on that level. Yeah. For me, as a child, Carnival was funny up to the point until I knew what it meant. It was all about the grown-ups trying to get laid, and then it stopped being funny. Maybe I would now be able to happily engage it again. I come from a region in Germany where there's Carnival every year. It's the only cultural thing that happens in the small towns where I come from, Carnival. But for years it was fantastic. But there is a moment when it can lose it. Yeah, that threat exists. Still happening every year.
Is there a question here in the front?
Hey, is absurdity always connected to humour, or is humorous absurdity just the best absurdity?
What do you think?
I think humorous absurdity is the best absurdity.
Yeah, I would potentially agree. I would agree. I'm not so good at Greek, but if you think humor as originally coming from the idea of the juices of the body, like your composition, like the mood that you're in is all about your humors, no? How your different organs produce kind of a different kind of balance of humors. And I like that physical bit about it, about the humor, as something bodily, really material, where the spirit and the body come together in the composition of your humors. And a lot of alchemy based on that, and medicine. I love that line from the knife. Is it medicine or social skill? And I feel like humor is somewhere between medicine and social skill. But it's also one of those things that is precisely in it is what it isn't, and it isn't what it is in that bracket, because the moment you identify it, you kill it. You cannot declare it. You cannot make a humor manifesto. I cannot say I will now say something funny. Yeah, and on that level, I feel humor is essentially the same thing as philosophy. Neither can I say I will now say something funny, nor can I say I will now say something philosophical. Yeah, it rules itself out. On that level, it's as easy to get there when you are there, and as difficult because you cannot intentionally declare that you're going there. Yeah.
We have another question is here in the front first. Lauren is here in the front.
There seems to be two figures that were present but maybe undeclared in the presentation, and to me it seemed as if there was the figure of the medium and the figure of the ventriloquist. And what seems interesting about those two positions is they also seem to speak of two possible modes of art writing. And I'm curious, I guess, which is the enemy and which is the friend?
The medium and the ventriloquist. It's difficult now, because with the ventriloquist is faking that he doesn't have power when of course he does. And that would only be my biggest enemy, because of course that I can be totally like that. That as a critic, like that's the pitfalls when you bank on empathy. When you become too manipulatively empathetic, of course you pull the strings. And that you pretend that you speak through the other, but you actually it's you all the way through. And that's terrible. But at the same time, there can be this kind of strange moment when you sometimes realize that I've had moments when an artist told me, like, I don't know, you speak from my heart precisely because I know that you're always talking about yourself. There is something about that needs to be probed. And it's a question of power on the one hand, but it's also a question of, empathy. Can you ever be sure that you're on the other side, or is that a moment when it bounces back to you, and it was you all the way through? And is that bad? I don't know. Because sometimes, the funny thing is that people sometimes feel understood in the moment when they understand that while talking through them, you also talk about you, yourself. Yeah? And with the medium, I find the medium infinitely fascinating, because we always talk about medium specificity. And I mean, which hovering table are we talking about? When you think medium specificity in a more occult sense, then everything, like the entire room is involved. No? Then medium specificity doesn't mean like how many flat paint on the canvas, but medium specificity means that the entire social congregation. And do the spirits arrive or not? And how many moves of the hand do you have to perform for that to happen? And I find that super interesting. And especially when you look at somebody like the and pitfall of medium, of course, in the history of modern art, the medium is always gendered feminine as the woman who is under the influence and who somehow can't help it. And when you realize, of course, she could always help it. And that's a history where also the Baroness comes in, where the sister to the medium is the muse. And the moment that you treat the Baroness as the medium of Duchamp, as the muse of Duchamp, she disappears as an artist, when actually she is the super artist, precisely because she's the medium of a lot of social commotion. Like things were happening around her, because she was just so dynamic. And her artwork is partially the invention of the ready-made, and partially, I'm assuming, many, many fun evenings in New York, where that's the artistry of mediumship that can only partially be measured in terms of products. But to understand that dynamic of the modern mediumship and how that was actually maybe driving modernism, rather than the identifiable outcomes, we would need a completely different form of art history, a different form of witnessing that which we can never fully reconstruct, but still somehow tap into and be with the medium, somehow see how the medium was working it.
I think we've got time maybe for one more question. I think.
Good. So I haven't had a chance to read the catalog article, and I'm looking forward to it. And the lecture was a lot of fun. I had a question about your term with the miraculous, which seems to present a position in it, and I'm sort of curious about that. It seems to be supportive in a way, and I'm curious about it with regard to a term maybe like the terrific, which seems to be an embodiment of that same notion, which is suggestive of wonderful, but in fact means horrific. And it seems like in the things that you're presenting, there is you speak of, in a way, a privileging of the interpretation over understanding. Or in a way, I think we need to consider that the grifter is also miraculous, or that advertising is also miraculous in those same terms. And I'm curious if you're feeling that we should, or if you do, advantage the magician over the grifter, or a position like that, if you privilege interpretation over understanding.
No, I like terrific, and all these words that on the one hand totally profane. I think Fozzie Bear always says terrific, where it's but at the same time it also opens the kind of abyss to the speaking puppet. Miraculous I partially chose because. Partially to punch my own face, because I wrote about Bastian Ada and the search of the miraculous, where, of course, you first of all engage the miraculous in the key of the romantic sublime, when actually I realize now, I think the direction we should be going towards is more the absurdity of the religious, but as something really carnal, something really physical, and I think that the attempt is to drag the miraculous into the carnal, and kind of give rebirth to it from there, rather than looking for it on the horizon line, to look for it in these kind of many strange bodies. That's one thing. And the question of the two discourses of the frog and the monster I think the two discourses that frame this kind of split that opens up around the non-identity of it is what it isn't and it isn't what it is. Yeah? On the one hand, you can only enunciate, and enunciate means me want cookie. Yeah, I want this. I dig it. I think it's terrific. It's awesome. And the enunciation can only be ever so many different repetitions of the same thing. Awesome. Again and again and again. You enunciate as a critic. And the other is then maybe not interpretation, but the hope to be like the frog. On the one hand, jumping around the constant enunciation, doing a little dance around Cookie Monster in the attempt to speak back to it. Like you enunciate and you speak back to your own enunciation in a kind of a strange ping pong. If it works. If it doesn't work, it becomes interpretation. If it works, it's monster and frog, one enunciating, the other talking back to the enunciation. That would be the discourses that I would propose. And do you need to understand to enunciate? No, you need to love it. You need to dig it. You need to love it and let it go through your body and enunciate. But on the other hand, to speak back. Then you're again the puppeteer who's speaking back to its own doll. So you have to be in it and out of it as you go through the it is what it is and it isn't what it is. You're in it and in front of it. So then we have a game of positionality where you have to go in some motion back and forth between enunciation and talking back to it. And talking back to it is also it's on the one hand a performance, but then it's also an obligation because you owe the thing a response. I totally love the scene in Alice in Wonderland when the pudding starts talking to it and the queen says, say something. You shouldn't just leave the conversation to the pudding. I think that's the obligation of the frog talking back to the monster. Like a discourse under the obligation that you owe something to the enunciatory voice that demands cookie. And you fail because you run out of cookie at some point.
Well, on that note,
no more cookie.
shall we draw things to a close? Thank you all very much for coming. Thank you very much for a really fascinating talk. It will be online again, so you can watch us again. So thank you all.
Thank you.